So we're going to start. First off, I wanted to say to everybody, thank you so much for being here. Although despite the rain, you made it a point to come here and sit in the seat and warm up the chair just so you could listen to me and my story, the little unique experience that I have within my community, within my region, within my sense of self in respect to the whole world. So thank you for being here, and then we will begin. This is Tenzin, my story. Really briefly, just what we're going to talk about today is my story. I'll introduce myself, I'll introduce my parents, the journey that they took, and then I'll talk about my specific journey and really the identity that I have learned and found throughout my experience, my life. And then finally, what you all are here and how you can help support the work that has helped shape my life and my journey. Next. So just to let everyone, my name is Tenzin Nordon. In Tibetan, Tenzin Nordon, I think, means, Tenzin means holder of the Buddhist doctrine, and then Nordon means the goddess of wealth. Hopefully I become rich once in my lifetime. It hasn't happened yet, but I'm still waiting for it. But my humble beginnings came and originated from me being born here in India, but I actually currently live in Minnesota, USA. How many know where Minnesota is in the world?
I was born in Minnesota.
You were born in Minnesota, so we have a Minnesota connection here. That's very rare, actually, all the way in India. But I actually currently live in Minnesota, USA. I speak Tibetan, Hindi, English, and a little bit of Mandarin. And lastly, I'm currently serving at the Women's Empowerment Desk over at CTA through Tibet Corps. So let's begin with my parents, because I couldn't be here if it wasn't for my parents coming together and saying, hey, let's get married and have a baby. And so my parents actually both are really close by. My dad lives in Nyam, Tibet, which is really at the border of Nepal and Tibet. My mom lives a valley beyond that. So I don't remember exactly what the name of the hometown is, but essentially it's right around that area, and they both pay taxes to Dzongkha. I think that's the region that they pay taxes to. But my mom and dad were born in Nyam and in that area in Tibet, and then basically around age 9 and 13 for them, they left and went into Tsum. They were going to India, but via Tsum, and so they actually spent a year in Tsum because at that time, a lot of folks that were running away, leaving Tibet because of the Chinese occupation, found themselves going on the same trek. There were about a few different routes, but my mom and dad actually took the Tsum route out because they were so close to Nepal. And then from Tsum, they spent a year there, really just like every other Tibetan out there that just had left Tibet, pawned off their belongings just to try to get a little bit of money, a little bit of way, and lived in refugee camps that were really like tents. They weren't even camps like settlements we see today, but really, really refugee camps as you imagine them. That's what they were like over in Tsum. And so after that year, they were able to go to Dharamsala, India, where they started. Some of them started. I think my mom and dad both were able to go to school for the first time. In Tibet, they weren't doing that at all. In Tibet, they were actually I think living in a semi-nomadic sort of format, and so they would have a farm, a small farm. They would have a house, and then they would have cattle and some sort of animals that they would take depending on the time of the year. But for the most part, they had a physical location they called home. But when they came to Dharamsala, everybody was put into school. So my mom and dad were both put into school, and my dad was able to complete up to 8th grade. My mom went further, but from there on, they were scattered all across India, really. And my mom and dad both got placed in the same place, which is the Norgaling Tibetan settlement in Bandra, which is in Maharashtra, India. That is where my mom and dad call home now today, beyond their home in Tibet. So this is the route that they took just to get to India. And then, next, like I said earlier, my mom and dad lived a valley apart. They came together. They were in the Norgaling Tibetan settlement, and then they decided, hey, we're going to get married. Their parents actually arranged the marriage for them, and they were able to get married right after. But for a long time, many times, I think people don't think that you would get married to somebody who you'd know, but actually in my mom and dad's case, they actually knew each other from Tibet. So that was kind of different. That was nice. This is my mom and dad. These are my mom and dad. I tend to think that they kind of look like actors. In the past, they look really, really Zikbu and pretty. I would say Zikbu is handsome and pretty. This is my mom and dad right after they got married in Damsala. And then once they got married, they had little old me. This is me. This is my little brother. We were living together. Not often, but like a few months of the year. Growing up, my father worked in the CTA. So either he worked in Bandara Shija, where the Norgaling Tibetan settlement, for a few years, but then he moved and worked at the CTA in Dharamsala. And so growing up from age, I don't know, from the time that I was born to until almost 8 or 9 years old, when I went to America, my dad had always lived further away from my mom and my brother. And for my mom, brother, and I lived in Chandigarh because my mom was actually a nurse, and we were at PGI in PGI Hospital. We lived in the staff quarters there until I was 8.5, 9 years old. So that's that. This is my mom when she was going to school back in the day. This is an old photo that I pulled out. Most of the folks here are, what is it called, are Indian, and then there are a few Tibetan folks here. He's also in Minnesota. She's in Wisconsin right now. But this was one of the schools that they attended when they were growing up. And then this is my mom, me, and then my brother. And this is in our settlement that I'd showed earlier, the Norgaling Tibetan settlement in Bandara, Maharashtra, India. So life in India, you're probably thinking, oh, that's so weird. You're Tibetan. Why don't you live in a Tibetan settlement, right? And that is the case for most Tibetans. But for me, my life was very different because my mom was working in a hospital as a nurse, and my dad was working at CTA. And so we really we lived our life in Chandigarh, India, and I honestly didn't know of my Tibetan identity until I came to the US. In India, my first language was actually Hindi. I was surrounded by Indian folks all the time. There were only 2 other Tibetan families in all of Chandigarh at that time. And we would only go into, our mom and dad's settlement, Bandara, maybe once a year, or I'd go to Dharamsala to visit my dad sometime, or I would go elsewhere to meet my family. But for the most part, this was kind of like my baseline from when I was born to until I think I was 8.5 to 9 years old. This is me, if you couldn't tell. And then this is my crèche. So right at PGI Hospital staff quarters, the first floor, which here you'd call the first floor, but technically for us it's the second floor. The first floor was where we lived, and then right below was the crèche that I would, daycare, where I would be living in when my mom was at work. And so this is a picture from our crèche celebration at the time. This is another photo from school, and again, you can see I'm just one of the folks that's going to school. And so that was kind of like my experience there. And then every now and again, I would go to the Shija that I was talking about. This is actually my dad's home in Shija. The building is new now, so this building is gone, but this was the first building that they had when they first came to the Shija at the time. So myself and my brother. And then this is me in Dharamsala when I used to go visit my dad. And then when I actually did get to go to other places like my Shija and and Dharamsala and whatnot, I got to meet my extended family. And so these are 2 pictures of my first cousins, second cousins, that sort of a thing. But I just wanted to share with you all the connection and role family has in my story, because there are a few themes in my story, and one of which is family, because I keep connecting to them over and over again, and because of how they've shaped me into who I am today. Go ahead. And so once I was, about 8.5, 9 years old, I went into, my dad actually had previously gone to the US because America let 1,000 Tibetans come into America. I think it was the 1990 Act, Tibet Act of 1990 or so. And my dad was one of the 1,000 folks that was able to go, and he went in the early 90s to the US. He settled in Minnesota, and then for about 5 years or so, I was, my brother, my mom, and I were just living in Chandigarh, just like our everyday usual, until 1998 came, and that's when we actually moved from Chandigarh, India, to Minneapolis as a family. We were very privileged to do so. A lot of families around that time also moved there around that time as well. 1998, some moved in 1996, 97, 98, 99, 2000. That was when the first wave of Tibetans, at least in Minnesota, their families came to the U.S. And so as my father was trying to figure out, his life, his career, his, way to create some sort of life for us outside of India, 1998 is when also a lot of other families also came. And that was the establishment of the first community outside of just the first 1,000 folks. And so that was really cool. Since you're from Minnesota, there's actually an exhibit right now at the Minnesota. Oh my gosh, it's called Far Away from Home. It's at the museum right next to the MIA.
I haven't been there in 58 years.
Okay. Well, if you end up going there, that exhibit is going past, and it's actually going to be an online exhibit, so you can actually connect and see it. But it's called Far Away from Home. I wrote the panels for that, if you're curious. And so that shares the story of really the first wave of Tibetan families and sort of where the Tibetan community in Minnesota is today. But really, I went from Chandigarh to India, and that was like that first, for me, thinking about, I was quote unquote Indian, right? I was speaking Hindi. I had family that maybe couldn't understand me necessarily. I was speaking in Hindi all the time. And then I moved to Minneapolis, and holy crap, there's so many Tibetans. I've never been around so many Tibetans. And so now my first experience being in the Tibetan community, it becomes very, very intense and very different. And at the same time, I'm battling not knowing English and going to English school. Like, I remember the first day of school, and we had a test. It's all in English, and I bombed it. I bombed it like crazy. And so thinking about where I belonged, who I am, where do I connect, all of those pieces came to me, and I was hitting the ground running, as you say, that idiom. And so life in America was tough because I had to learn two languages, Tibetan and English at the same time, because I was surrounded by Monday to Friday, a lot of Americans who come from a diverse array of like backgrounds, experiences, ages, all that stuff, races, ethnicities, which is important in America. And at the same time, on Saturdays and Sundays, I would see this Tibetan community that I'd never really connected to before. And I was thinking to myself, how do I connect with these people? Even to this day, some people remember me and my brother as the brother and sister that only speak Hindi, that speak Hindi. And so at that time, I don't remember it because I think there was some sense of trauma there because I didn't feel like I fit in at the time. But I actually will say that because of the intense support and push from my parents, and then also Tibetan Saturday school for us, and then also Shapto, which is Tibetan dance, music and dance class, which we would have, all of my Saturdays would be full, like really, really packed. I felt like I was going to school 6 days a week out of the 7, sometimes 7 days out of 7. And so my life started out as someone who was not appreciative, that didn't know, not aware of who I was, and also how I could connect to the community that I found myself in. But then at the same time, I found strength in the fact that there was something that I could connect to, that there was something that I could do once I had the basic foundation for me to relate, both learning about what Tibet was, what the Tibetan cause was, who I was, the language, the religion, all of that, and then putting it into practice and being able to really be involved in the community and to be my whole self and bring all of me, not just the parts that I had just learned. So this is a picture of me in high school. Every year we did a mosaic, which is essentially different students from different communities would come together and showcase their culture. So this is our Tibet booth. At the time, we had 4 students in high school, and so we put this booth together. We had books, we had like clothing attire, we had like photos, our flag, everything, memorabilia, a map and photos. And then I continued that on. That was high school, and I pushed that on and did that and continued that into to college and beyond as well. This, for those of you who don't know, this is Minneapolis. We don't have that big of a skyline, but I like to say this is my home away from home. So if Tibet is my home, this is my second home. This is where I would find myself if I think of that idea of home. Next. I said a little bit about my identity. I will say, I think when you're young, you think about how do you get connected to people? How do you get connected to young people if you can't speak to them, right? And the other way to do that is really through the different activities that there are available, right? So whether it's Tibetan school, whether it's, Shapto, which in English means like Tibetan music and dance group or class or whatnot. That was where I found my way to connect to people and then also to practice what I'd learned in terms of the Tibetan that I'd learned at the time. This is all of my high school years. Literally, like there are different songs I actually was a boy in this as well. This is actually only performed by men typically, but because we didn't have men to perform it, women performed it. It was great. We did solo songs, so it got me on the stage. It got me I got more and more comfortable with speaking on a stage, so that was really cool. We got to learn instruments. I got to learn the damnye, which is a Tibetan lute, and then a yangje, which is, I don't know what they're called exactly, but minghogyo. It's a different stringed instrument, but it's a box essentially, and you pluck the strings on it. And then in high school, the coolest experience that we had was this is the Tibetan Shapto group. We actually went over to New York City. We drove this coach bus to New York City and performed in the New York City a community center at New York City for the New York community. So that was really cool because this was a fun trip as a high schooler to be able to do. We did have chaperones that were our parents, but overall it was a great way for us to connect to both our culture community and then also get a new experience outside of just the Minnesota bubble that we were really encompassed in and sheltered in. And then again, who can forget the American dream, right? Everybody that goes to America goes with a dream in mind. And for me and my mom and dad, especially my mom and dad, because thinking about their journey and them going from both Tibet to Nepal to India and then now to America, what they really wanted at the core was for me and my brother to be able to have an education, a higher education, something that neither of them actually had. And so for us, like I knew growing up, like college was very, very important, but we didn't know how to get to college, right? Because the American college system is also very, very hard to navigate through. And so I was the elder child, so I had to navigate through that. But my American dream was always to go to college and to get all the experiences that I could for not just myself, but also my family, my parents, and then also my extended family who was still in India. Most of my extended family is still in India. And so for me to be able to have this was a huge privilege and honor, and at the same time, it was daunting and fun too at the same time. This is me and on a trip. You can't really see, but that's me. I was in choir for I think a year and a half or so in college, and so that's that. Are you familiar with colleges in Minnesota? Oh, okay. I went to Carleton, so these are all pictures from Carleton.
No, okay.
Okay. It's a small liberal arts school, but basically we had a choir, and I was like, I love to sing. Let me try this out. So I did. That was from there. I was part of the Asia group over on campus, so Asian students in America, really thinking about what it means to be Asian American in the U.S. And then this is our trio SSS group, and then this is me graduating, walking. We had an outdoor ceremony. It was beautiful, beautiful. It was nice and sunny. And then my family and friends that were there. And I think one of the coolest experiences that I had while in college was the ability to actually go study abroad. I went and studied Chinese for about 5.5 months in 2 different programs. This is a picture of me next to the Great Wall of China. That was one of the big formative things for me as a Tibetan, but also still somebody who was trying to figure out who I was as a person. In college, I had actually lived in India and in the US the same amount of time. So I was trying to figure out who am I? Am I Tibetan? Am I American? Am I Indian? Am I Tibetan American Indian? Am I Indian American? What am I, right? And so it was actually during this time period, which was very formative for me, when I decided I was going to be Tibetan American. And that's how I would identify for myself. And no matter what people choose at that moment, right, it doesn't matter as long as they are self-identifying. I think that was the biggest thing that I learned from that experience. And no matter what people identify as, I think ultimately if it's their choice, that is a power, and that's a beauty that is so important, and at the same time it's beautiful because people could choose who they are and how they connect and how they see the world and who they are in relation to everybody else around them. And so I chose at that time in college that I would be Tibetan American because of what was important to me and what my life experiences thus far had really brought together. Next. I can't I can't just talk about my study abroad experience without talking about actually my Tibet experience as well. I actually was trying to go into Lhasa, Tibet, but at the time, this was 2008, I was one of the few Tibetans that actually was able to get a permit into China, or not a permit, visa into China to study abroad, but at the same time, they did not let me go in to Tibet at the time, even though my whole group of folks that were studying abroad with me were able to go into Lhasa. I was the only one who was not able to because they had said that I was an expatriate, which if you look at the definition of an expatriate, that means you actually yourself leave the country. And I was never in the country to begin with, so I don't know what they're calling me an expatriate for. But all in all, I didn't get to go to Lhasa, Tibet, but I did get to go to some parts of Amdo, which were really, really important as well. Because at that time, remember, I didn't have a physical locality that I could connect to and say, this is home. Tibet was an idea or a concept for me, philosophical concept for me that my parents had really generationally brought in front of me. But this was the first time that I actually stepped on Tibetan soil, and it was a whole different experience. I didn't think I was going to be emotional or anything, or I wasn't going to be different, right? But when I actually went there, I did feel a sense of connection and belonging. I went to Tsongombo. Who's heard of the song Tsongombo Nangla Tse Nyama Nya Tse Mithu Tse? Have you guys heard it, right? Kongyue, have you? Okay, some of you maybe have heard it, but it's a song that I grew up singing in Tibetan school and just in general where I would hear it. And I actually got to go to it, actually. In Tibetan, it's called Tsongombo, and I guess in Chinese it's called Qinghaihu. But basically the song talks about how blue it is. And so when I went there, I felt something. I felt this connection to the land, to my home, to this idea of Tibet that was so different because I could actually feel it, I could smell it, I could breathe it, I could taste it, I could touch it. And let me tell you, it was actually blue. It's like super, super blue. And I went in the middle of winter. This is water and this is snow. So
is there water in Tibet? Is there like big
yeah, this is called Tsongombo, so it's called Blue Lake. And I'm telling them that basically it was really, really blue. And so I didn't realize how blue it was because the song essentially talked about how blue it is and how many fish are in there. And I was like, yeah, it truly is like blue. So that was really cool. And then at the same time that I was able to experience this, I connected with the current Tibet of today, which was also desertification, right? This picture was maybe like 10 minutes away from actually the lake. And I was so confused at the time because I'm like, why is there a desert in the middle of Tibet when, I'm right next to a body of water? This doesn't click with me. And later on, I learned it was because of desertification, because of the fact that what China was doing on the land was making it essentially unbearable for that area, within that area. So I learned about desertification. I saw it in front of me at the same time. And then this is Kumbum Gomba. So in Kumbum Amdo, which is the temple or the monastery where His Holiness also used to study at, as close to where he was born. He was born in Taksar. That time I tried to go, but they had closed it down because it was 2008, and so I couldn't go there. But I did get to Kumbum, which was really, really cool. And I got to see sort of the impacts of the Chinese government on the areas that are not included in TAR, the Tibetan Autonomous Region. Because again, Lhasa is part in TAR. I wasn't able to go, they didn't let me go, but these areas are considered Chinese areas, even though they're historically part of Tibet. And so that was really super amazing because the fact that I even got to go here is something that was very, very rare in 2008. A lot of people did not get visas. A lot of people were turned back at the airport. And yet I was able to go by myself to Tibet. And I was like, hey, mom and dad, by the way, I'm in Tibet now. And they were like, what? I didn't want to worry them because this is all, again, like very new territory. The fact that I was going to China at the time was very, very nerve-wracking and scary. And this was my first trip abroad by myself. So all of these experiences were very formative for me and really important. But then at the same time, not just personally, but also because of my identity that was developing at the time as a Tibetan American. Next. And then
What year was that?
2008. 2008. And then this was my second year in college when I went to Tibet. And then next I have my TCV experience, which was in 2009. So I got back from Tibet. I was like, oh crap, like what do I do now? I have some time during the summer. I want to do something. I want to give back. I want to connect to my Tibetan roots. And I was able to go to Upper TCV, which you can actually go up here in Dharamsala, and teach English for about a month. And so I did that in 2009. And these are some of my students. This is the Moksang. If folks are familiar with Upper TCV, there are these buildings that look like, what are Moksangs? What you put momos in, right? Tibetan dumplings in. The steamer, there we go, steamer. The buildings are called steamers because they look like Moksangs, steamers. And these are some of my students that were there. And it was beautiful because I think the reason why I wanted to go is because I felt like, oh, I'd never had that experience of going to school and learning Tibetan with everybody, and what that experience would be like if I was just surrounded by Tibetan people. And so my want and desire to connect to Tibet and Tibetan communities abroad took me here, and I was able to actually put that into use and also give back a little bit and get to meet some of my young students who now are all over the world as well, right? And so this is really, really cool.
What is the name of that organization?
Upper TCV
Upper TCV. And
School.
Which state, where is it?
It's here. It's in Dharamsala. You can actually go to. Do you know where Dal Lake is?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's that right there. That school.
Tibetan Children's Village.
Yeah.
Tibetan Children's Village. Tibetan Children's Village.
Yeah, and then so some of you went to ITYF. This is Lunde. He was my student back in the day. Yeah. Okay, next. So TCB was really important, really, because I felt like growing up, I never had that connection to a school. And a lot of Tibetan students today, or Tibetan young people today, have a connection, a network through the schools that they went to, and that experience of like, oh, remember that one teacher, or oh, remember what happened there? And I never had that connection, and so I wanted to go and seek it out, and that's what I did to do that. More so than that, actually, I wanted to connect to the Tibetan community more so in the community that I belonged in. And this is in Minnesota. This is all the community work that I've done across the time period from 2008 to really just even today. I was a part of three different organizations. I started two organizations. One was a college access program called Lamde, which is still going on today. It's a college access program to help students navigate the college sort of application process and get them to college, whatever they want in the future. So this is a picture from one of our open houses. Another picture is, this is also another picture from Lamde, which is basically connecting our tutors. We also have a tutoring program connected to the actual navigation college access part of the work that we do. And we have tutors here who are coming at our regularly planned tutoring session every Friday. And this is one of them that we went to. And we would gather high school students and then college students and then actually do homework together every Friday. Fun, right? That was one of the organizations I helped start and work through. Another organization is Y4U, Youth for Umelam, which is the first Umelam organization for youth in the world, really. Middle Way Umelam, I don't know if you've heard, is basically a policy that His Holiness initiated, but then also the CTA carries out, essentially saying we're seeking we're seeking autonomy, genuine autonomy within the Chinese framework for Tibetans and Tibet. And so we were the first organization that brought youth into the mix of things. And through that experience, we were able to have Sikyum Pimpa Tsiring. At the time, I think he was just a CTA member or a Gasha member, but we had him come over there and speak. And then at the same time, every winter we celebrate Samdon Rinpoche's birthday. He was also somebody who worked really hard on that middle way policy. So we celebrate his birthday and we go to Tibetan Culture School and we talk about Samdon Rinpoche's, Professor Samdon Rinpoche's legacy in the work that he does. So this is me talking to the students at the time. Right now at the Tibetan Culture School that we have 150 young students going from age kindergarten to 8th grade. And then the last organization I was a part of is the Tibetan American Foundation in Minnesota, which is our community organization. So all of the other organizations are kind of sit underneath the umbrella of TAFM, which is the community organization that organizes everything related to the community that is the direct connection to CTA and His Holiness. So this is one of the things that we did for His Holiness receiving the Nobel Peace Prize. This is myself, and then these are just some folks, young folks, who are holding up a sign saying Tibetans in TAFM celebrate the 51st anniversary of His Holiness, the 14th Dalai Lama, receiving the Nobel Peace Prize. And then this was during COVID, because my term, actually, you have to be elected onto the board. My term ended up being during COVID, and so one of the things we had to do was the Sikyong election. So this is actually when the Sikyong was going to be elected, and people were putting in their votes, and it was during COVID, so we were all masked up with face shields on. So I just wanted to put this in because I wanted to remember, there was a time where we were not together in person, and that happened to be the same time that I was serving on the board as well. But community work really is at the core, sort of how I connect to the world and how I connect to the people in our community, and also learn about myself. So I think it's a huge, huge aspect of, or huge part of who I am and who I want to continue to be in the future. And then I cannot go without saying that I am a product of all of the programs, the funding, the passion, the love, the care that the different organizations that have hosted in these convenings have put forth, essentially. So these are just a few of the convenings that I've participated in across the years that go from 2016 to really to this year, 2024. The Tibetan Youth Leadership Program is for young youth over in the USA, that's hosted by ICT. They go to Washington, D.C., they learn about how to lobby, they learn about what leadership means in the Tibetan American context, and are able to put that and move that in motion. 2018 workshop on secular ethics and youth leadership put on by the Office of Tibet, International Conference Umilam, which we actually helped organize. So this was one that I helped co-organize in 2018. That was a really good experience. That is me right there. I'm so bummed I didn't turn my face. But and then 2019 I went to the 550 Youth Forum. We had a bunch of folks from all over the world come together. And then the Youth Leadership and Capacity Building Workshop in 2024, which was in Minnesota. That was really cool. And then finally, the International Tibetan Youth Forum of this year that was hosted in Dharamsala. So all of this to say, really, I'm the product of the hard work that people put together to create these convenings. And these convenings mean more than just, coming together. It's a way to celebrate who you are. It's a way to connect to others who have a similar sort of feeling and sense of purpose. And at the same time, it's a way to develop yourself personally, because not only are you able to network, but then also you're able to gain these new skills, both through the trainings that they provide, but then also through the platform that you're given while you're there. So it's really, really cool. So if any of you have not gone to any of these in the future, let me know, and I can tell you about what these are if you want to go to any of them in the future. And then I guess to sum it all up, really my identity, Tibetan identity, could not have, been composed or come together, not been created if it wasn't for, His Holiness, who helped us, successfully enter the exile, and then at the same time helped our community be successful and really not necessarily just survive, but also thrive. It couldn't have been possible for the generations of hard work that my family, my ancestors, the Tibetan folks, the Tibetan community in general have gone through to be able to bring me here to this place and be able to be who I am. And so for that, I feel the immense amount of privilege, the resilience that comes from, the generations of hard work that my ancestors have put forth, and at the same time it brings me to the sense of I need to serve and give back. No matter what I'm doing at what point of my life, I'm always going to be serving and giving that sense of service a priority in my life, no matter which phase I am in. So service is always in my mind, and I always think about that because of the upbringing that I have, the ancestry that we have, the resiliency that I was taught, and also the compassion that Tibetan culture typically, not typically, is embedding in our upbringing as well. So thinking about that, service is really important and encompasses my identity. I think there's a note of celebration as well. So the story cannot be just sad, right? All the time, we are refugees, we are stateless. Before I was in the US, I did not have any sort of like passport or whatnot. I was just an IC holder, just like every other Tibetan refugee. Didn't have a nation to call home necessarily, but to sometimes think about that and celebrate where we are today, because of how far we've come, and because at the same time we're here together and on a journey together. I think that's really powerful. It's not just one person going out, it's our whole community being brought up and lifted up together. And I want to celebrate that, and I want to celebrate the fact that we're able to, in exile, celebrate who we are as a people and what we bring to the world and humanity. And so this is a picture of this year's CTA Linkar, where I was able to dance with the Department of Finance folks over in CTA. We won first place, woohoo. And so celebration is always important, celebrating our culture, celebrating our language, and being able to preserve what is important and core to who we are as a people. And then finally, connection. I cannot forget to mention connection, because at every moment in time when I was attending a youth convening or when I was just coming on a family trip or whatnot, I was always meeting my Tibetan community members, but then also my family, extended family, who are all here as well. And so thinking about the theme of connection, like Tibetan identity, it provides me a connection and a stage for me to actually serve and feel like I have a sense of purpose to give back that service, something that I want to celebrate, something that I hope to celebrate, and I can. And then finally, the idea that I can connect to any Tibetan person, no matter where they are in the globe, because at one point of the day, we all share a same story to a certain degree. And the fact that, I can share that and I can say that makes me feel like I have somewhere that I can belong, and that's beautiful. And at the same time, that's makes me feel like I'm stronger because of it, for that reason. Next. So thinking about what you can do, all of you young folks here, and a participant from Minnesota or somebody who was born in Minnesota, go and talk to your local governments to put Tibet in their policy. I think that's huge, 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 because some of the programs and some of the legislation that was important to me and my story couldn't have happened if it wasn't for supporters like yourselves and activists and workers who are on the ground, grassroots, doing that work. I was able to come to the U.S. because of my dad being part of the legislation that brought the 1,000 Tibetans to the U.S. Because of all of the funding / the work that has happened for the Tibetan community from the U.S. government and other governments also, I was able to attend those youth convenings that you saw earlier. Like, all of that was the work of people who thought that it was important to preserve and also be able to celebrate the Tibetan identity and continue that on for our future sort of community members. I was the second generation of Tibetans, but now we have a new generation who are like little babies. The 150 students right now that are in Minnesota, just in Minnesota alone. And that work needs to continue on, because when you're in exile, the hardest thing is really to be able to find spaces where you can connect to who you are and your ancestry and the heritage that you have and you connect with. Another thing is really to educate yourself and others on the situation inside Tibet. I talked about my story in exile. My story in exile is very different. Everybody's story in exile is very different depending on where they are, where, or what experiences they've had, where their parents found themselves at that moment. I happen to have a very privileged upbringing, to my knowledge, I think. But there are a lot of Tibetans, 6 million, I would say, that are still in Tibet and are suffering still because they cannot practice who they are, what their cultural values and beliefs are, their religion, all of those things inside Tibet. And so the situation, we think, post almost 50, 60 years in exile would change, but it hasn't really. There are some areas where, it's still militarized. Like you haven't really seen any change in terms of like how you can be Tibetan. Physically, you can see different things. You can see different buildings and CCTV cameras everywhere. But in the sense of like, can you express yourself? Do you have the freedom of expression? Do you have the sense of I can protest peacefully at any point of the day that we in the U.S. have? That's still not available and accessible to a lot of Tibetans, and that's not okay considering that was our land, that was our nation at the time. Another way you can contribute is to donate to Tibetan NGOs. A lot of the NGOs that I talked about were also part of this story, and were the reason why I was able to not only learn about my Tibetan identity, express it, but then also be able to share it with other people and to prepare the next generation, because I do a lot of youth development work. So the donation is really, really important because it helps not just the current day, the work that happens in the current day, but really what happens continuously, and then also for the whole community moving forward in the future. And then finally, volunteering at Tibetan NGOs. If you're able to, I know everybody has a skill, everybody has a strength. If you can, there's a lot of work that Tibetan NGOs are doing every single day, and that work would go so much farther with so much more human capacity that they currently have. There are only about 150,000 or so Tibetans in exile, and there are so many nonprofits, right? And all of these nonprofits, NGOs have 3 to 10, 15 people on staff. So they're doing a lot of work continuously. So if there is a chance that you can give back, please do, because it's really important, and it really helps even the Tibetan community in exile go forward and think about what is that next era, what is that next next way that we can help the community flourish. And so with that being said, next, thank you. This is my family today, in case you were curious what we look like now. This was during Losar at the Tibetan Community Center. We have 2 community centers in Minnesota. Actually, this is the bigger one. And this is during our Tibetan New Year celebration where everybody comes out. And so we're in our best clothes, tip top and all that. So thank you. And if you have any questions, I'm here. Yeah.